Support for Greater Chattanooga is provided by EPB Fiber Optics and Unum.
It ought to concern every person because it is a debasement of our common humanity. It ought to concern every community because it tears at our social fabric. I'm talking about the injustice, the outrage of human trafficking.
There are 27 million people today that are living in slavery. 24% of those people are in sexual servitude. 76% of those people are in hard labor, brick kilns, rug manufacturing, fishing, those kinds of things. So it's prevalent all over the world, even though in every country in the world it's illegal.
Current figures show that it's second only to drugs in terms of the revenue that it produces. International Justice Mission last year reported that trafficking of all kinds globally constitutes about $150 billion annual business, $100 billion of which is being done on the sexual side. There's other research out there that shows that the United States contributes about 30% of the demand for sex trafficking. So with less than 5% of the world's population, we are possibly driving $30 billion of sex trafficking revenue.
People think human trafficking is something that happens in a third world country or something that happens in the movie Taken. And that does happen. But people don't really realize that human trafficking can look like a lot of different things. It isn't just what you see in the movies. It isn't just something that happens in a third world country. It's something that occurs in small towns and big cities across Tennessee. And in our state, human trafficking is defined specifically around commercial sex as a commercial sex act in which force, fraud, or coercion is involved. It is also a commercial sex act in which the individual being sold is under the age of 18.
There was a real tendency to view especially teenage runaways as people who had almost throwaway people. Those were teenage girls who had made their choice.
However, first of all, no 15-year-old has the legal right to make this decision. But the average age of entry into the commercial sex trade right now is between the age of 12 and 14. And one of the things that we battle is victim blaming.
I think a lot of times people don't view people that are caught up in it as victims. They don't understand that people are trapped into this, whether it's here or in the Philippines or Southeast Asia.
There's a blurry line here because it's easy to talk about children being trafficked. Then when you start talking about adult women being trafficked, there's this idea that they can just get out of it anytime they want to. And that's simply not the case.
Women are out there being coerced physically, emotionally, financially into doing this activity. And those are all crimes against those women. And they suffer the same traumas and the same issues related to being victims that anybody would.
The average lifespan of a trafficking victim, going from day one of having been trafficked, is 7 years. If someone is being forced to service anywhere from 10, 12, 15 people a night sexually, that in and of itself is going to take quite a toll. If drug use is involved, being it forced on them or something they choose to take on to cope, then that's going to take a toll as well. And we haven't even brought up the physical abuse that goes on either at the hands of the Johns or the hands of the trafficker or both.
Just as prevalent is the idea that I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to take you to get your nails done and your hair done and I'm going to polish you up like a diamond. And this type of language, that can be just as abusive and simultaneously attractive.
The trafficker wants the victim to see the trafficker as their source of money, their source of affirmation, their source of everything, because it's in that connection that the trafficker makes all of his money. And that's really what this all comes down to, is money.
One of the ways that it showed up in America is as a result of the war on drugs. Because the charges were so heavy for people who were selling drugs, they just changed products that they sell to something that didn't have the same ramifications for them in the legal system. So we had to make it so that the consequences for trafficking were such that it might not be worth the risk.
So the TBI did some extensive research, both in 2011 and 2013, to really try to understand human trafficking, because we realized that if we really want to make a dent in this issue, we got to know what we're up against. So we partnered with Vanderbilt University, and we did an extensive research project in 2011, which basically set out to try to understand what is human trafficking and how does it present in Tennessee. And what we found is that human trafficking occurs in a vast majority of Tennessee counties. But the law in Tennessee is among the strongest laws in the country, fortunately. We got there because there's a lot of work that's been going on for the better part of a decade to address this issue in our state.
The modern day anti-slavery movement, depending on who you talk with, is about a decade to a decade and a half old. And it was about 8 to 10 years ago that we started forming and started finding other similarly minded agencies, either at the governmental level or non-governmental level, and we very quickly came together, agreed to work together, and so we have a model that is unique.
I'm really proud to serve and live in a state like Tennessee that has taken ownership of this issue, and I am proud that law enforcement is amongst the leaders in approaching this issue progressively and really changing the way we handle it.
We need law enforcement to know what to look out for, what the warning signs are. And we need, furthermore, to sort of change the conversation and the mindset that law enforcement might have stuck in there. When they're seeing someone that they might label a prostitute, we need them to pump the brakes and ask themselves, is there more happening here?
We here at Chattanooga Police Department have built a victim services unit to create a victim-centered organization that really distinguishes between victims and offenders, and also realizes that many times an offender is also a victim.
Until a few years ago, let's say the victim was 15. The person most likely to be charged and taken in was the 15-year-old. We weren't even considering the fact that there was somebody pushing the button behind the 15-year-old. So one of the laws we passed was to decriminalize prostitution where children are concerned. So she's not charged as a perpetrator. Instead, the weight of the justice system is falling on the buyer, and then if we can identify him or her, the seller.
We've had to do a lot of things to increase, the type of crime that it is to a felony, because in some cases, being a pimp could have only had really misdemeanor consequences. We've passed over 30 pieces of legislation making the trafficking laws in Tennessee tougher, and we're really proud of that.
When we got original jurisdiction, the director here at TBI wanted to hit the ground running and said, let's do operations. So now we've done operations across the entire state. And so over the course of the operations that we've done since 2015, we've arrested more than 200 men. We've recovered a handful of juveniles. We've charged a handful of traffickers as well. And I think what we've also done is send the message that we're looking.
If they can identify and arrest perpetrators, both those who are selling and those who are buying, the next step in that is what can we do about rescuing the victims themselves? So at each of those operations, we have had people close by that they could meet with the victim, talk about our services, what is available through us and our various partners, and make those services available immediately.
We could not do this work without the support of the Tennessee Anti-Slavery Alliance, which are these 4 nonprofits that have sort of emerged as the regional leaders. You've got RestoreCorps in Memphis, End Slavery here in the Nashville area. You've got Second Life in Chattanooga, and you've got Grow Free in Knoxville. And they are there to provide that myriad of needs that a survivor has, individualized care.
There's often a very significant trauma history, and so that takes a long time to address their needs, and it requires often substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, often legal assistance because they have a very long legal record for very usually minor infractions, but that can prevent someone from getting employed gainfully. The average number of places a victim has to go is 10 to 12. So the more we can do to remove those barriers, that's the goal at the state level.
Shared Hope International is a national leader in the fight against human trafficking, and every year they come out with a report card where they basically take a comprehensive look at states and say, what do your laws look like? What do your survivor services look like? What does your public awareness look like? Sort of every little component that comes into addressing human trafficking plays a part in a state score. And Tennessee has been number 1 in the past. Currently we sit at number 2, right behind Louisiana. So that's a great place for us to be as a state, and that's something that we can be proud of as Tennesseans.
I've always felt we were special, and we are in every way, but Tennessee really is on the front edge of having people who care about this and people who are willing to put up resources to end this.
I didn't really quite understand what human trafficking was, but the leaders of the Women's Fund approached me and said, we need your help. You know, obviously when we hear these stories, we think, okay, it's not in our backyard. We feel for these people, but when it's in your own backyard, when it's happening in your own backyard, and you know, where the Women's Fund educated us on where it's happening in the hotel industry, which at that point, I had no idea. I really didn't. No one was talking about it.
Once the issue of human trafficking came to Mitch Patel's attention, then he incorporated that knowledge into his onboarding process for any new employees who work in his hotel to recognize the signs of human trafficking and report. And he also developed a training program for people who work in the hospitality industry, and he was able to take that nationwide.
We are in a great position to assist and shed some light on the situation because, to be quite honest, it's happening at hotels. And so, as opposed to burying our head in the sand and looking away, we decided we're going to do something about it.
We have a moral obligation, our industry and our community, to help.
We realized early on that you're never going to arrest your way out of the problem of human trafficking, and that's why law enforcement can't be the only ones talking about human trafficking and can't be the only ones trying to stop human trafficking, because that won't work. The only thing that will work is comprehensive partnerships among the nonprofit sector, law enforcement, government, and the general public.
Without committed human beings, issues just do not get resolved. So much of this is done through our faith-based organizations. There's so many churches across our state and here in our own city that care deeply about this issue. And again, it takes that entire myriad of groups to really have the kind of effect and to keep it sustained.
This is a human issue here, you know, that's happening right here in our community. If we care about the lives of an 11, 12, 14, 15-year-old girl or boy, then I think every single person in Hamilton County and Tennessee should have an active voice in combating this problem.
We together can, in fact, shift how things are going on this particular issue. I'm a real passionate, kind of vision-minded person. I'm just nuts enough to believe we can not only turn the tide on this, but eventually we can end it.
If you're a fan of Greater Chattanooga, support it. Becoming a sustaining member of WTCI is easy and affordable, and it makes a big difference. Visit greaterchattanooga.org/donate. Thanks.